Hare Krishna, Chaitanya Chandradas again. These are the questions in regards to the GBC principles and other questions that were asked once you read the papers about the GBC rules and stuff. So here, number one is, where does the GBC principle come from? The GBC principle came from the desires of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Before he left this world, he gave these instructions to his disciples, the organizers of the Gaudiya Math, to help them so that they could carry on his movement. But they failed to do that. And then here's the second question is, what is the cause cited by Srila Prabhupada for the Gaudiya Math falling apart? That's the reason. Because they wanted to establish a single acharya type situation, organize the Gaudiya Math in that way around one acharya. And of course, some of the different members of the Gaudiya Math wanted to claim their particular maths that they'd been working in and work independently. Therefore, they weren't able to, in an organized fashion, spread Krishna consciousness according to the will of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Srila Prabhupada. The third one is, why so much focus on organizational management? Is an ISKCON spiritual movement driven by individual inspiration and realization? Of course, it's driven by inspiration and realization, but in order to spread Krishna consciousness the way that it's been being spread and the way that Srila Prabhupada wanted it to spread, as we're trying to carry that out, is on having an organization and being able to engage people. Organization, Prabhupada said, one thing that stuck with me, he said, management follows preaching. So naturally, Prabhupada managed so many people, like the artists. When he found out that they were inclined to do art, he immediately started having them painting. The persons who had different inclinations, Prabhupada would engage them in their particular inclinations, the dramatic people, the kirtaniyas, the different varieties of people, all the people that came. Prabhupada wanted everybody to serve in Lord Chaitanya's mission. So that's called management, and you got to be able to create services and facilitate services for people. This is management. And as the institution can continue in the future to run the different temples and preaching centers and restaurants and farm communities, therefore the mission can continue into the future and continue to expand as Srila Prabhupada saw, as is the will of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that in every town and village, the chanting of the holy names will be heard, will be chanted. The fourth question, GBC should be acharya-like and not absorbed in matter and management. Prabhupada made it very clear in these papers, but also throughout his preaching, especially when his devotees were working in India, that working on establishing Krishna consciousness by building temples and by taking care of finances, this was non-different. It was the same as one's spiritual life. It is establishing the mission of Lord Chaitanya, this preaching mission of ISKCON. So those who are engaged in these activities, Prabhupada encouraged them, like Surabi, who was a Swami at the time, or maybe, I don't know, maybe he wasn't a Swami then, but he became a Swami later. Anyway, he was the designer, the engineer-like person for the temples, and he was the job manager to build the Vrindavan temple, and it was a tremendous amount of work. And all the devotees who were managing projects, sometimes they would complain to Prabhupada, looking for some mercy or looking for something. And Prabhupada would say, no, this work of that you're doing, of managing these temples and managing these building projects, it is the same. It is spiritual life. Because what it does is it pushes you past your limits. These projects require, and these festivals require, so much effort to put on that we see that sometimes the devotees are maxed out, so to speak. But they can go past their maxed out stage, and they can go further and further. And Prabhupada pushed the devotees to go further, like Los Angeles. When I first joined, they were doing the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And they said, well, we can do, one volume every 2 months. Prabhupada said, no, I want all 17 done in 2 months. And Rameshwar said, that's impossible. Prabhupada said, impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary. So they figured it out and they got it done. So these activities of organizing, financing, and all these things are all transcendental because the mission is transcendental. Number 5, the GBC system created a heavy-handed top-down system and is the oppressive and restrictive. Never quite understood that one so much. Exactly, because Prabhupada set up our temples in an autonomous way, where there were preachers, temple president, vice president, temple commander, the preachers. The mission was to distribute books. We were all back in the 70s competing between temples to see who could distribute the most books. We weren't being oppressed or anything like that, heavy-handed. The only heavy-handedness was that we were very enthused to try and please Srila Prabhupada. So the preaching mission that Srila Prabhupada gave, that his society is trying to organize and maintain, is the most liberating activity of preaching Krishna consciousness, giving Krishna to others. So it's far from being oppressive, it's liberating. At least for me, because I've been engaged in preaching activities pretty much my whole devotional career, since the Radha Damodar days in 1975, and in Dallas at Kalachandji's restaurant and so many other preaching projects. So, I don't quite understand that one so much. I have never been exposed to any kind of heavy-handed, top-heavy systems. I've just, helped Tamal Krishna Maharaj go on preaching engagements to Fiji and to the Philippines and to India, and, helped different preaching projects. There was never any kind of GBC-ish heavy-handedness going on. I don't quite understand that. Next one is number 6. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Any governance has checks and balance system. How is this essential need addressed in the GBC system? Well, Prabhupada wanted everybody to be responsible for their individual zones and temples, and he wanted the GBCs to be involved in understanding the finances and the management, the preaching, and the sadhana of the individual temples. So he wanted there to be, and then the little bit that I have been involved in, treasury things, there always has to be 2 signatures. You can't just give it, carte blanche to somebody to spend Krishna's money. It has to be done with the proper, plan and the proper permissions given. So the GBC is there, and then just this thing that we're going through here, trying to become an authorized spiritual master, Diksha Guru. This is a checks and balance system here. There's also a checks and balance system in the process of taking initiation. There's a whole disciple course and things that are being asked that the people that want to get initiated learn as a foundation, so that when they do get initiated, they have some foundation and they have more knowledge. So there's always been some kind of, checks and balances for the gurus to accept disciples that I know of, that I've ever seen. There's always been some kind of period where they have to chant for 6 months or a year or whatever and follow the regular principles. And, we just don't let everybody do anything they want. We have to check on people. Prabhupada said no lazies and no crazies. So there's always been, in my experience, because I've been in Dallas a long time, we've always had checks and balances. And we answered to the GBC. When Tamal Krishna Maharaj was alive, he was the GBC in Dallas. I think we haven't had a GBC there in over 20 years. Just now, like last year, we finally got some kind of secretary person who's the GBC, but actually we were GBC less for more than 20 years. There was somebody that wasn't authorized claiming they were the GBC, but we actually didn't even have one for 20 something years. I don't know why that happened, but anyway, what is the scope of the GBC's duties? Well, we just said it. Prabhupada wanted them to be involved in the temple, checking to see if there was the checks and balances system, making sure that the money wasn't misspent, making sure that the people were following this sadhana and becoming devotees, that there was preaching going on. That's a lot right there. That's a tremendous amount. I don't know what it's like now, but this is just from the paper that I was given to read that talks about this. How long should a GBC member serve? Number 8. And how are GBC members selected? Prabhupada wanted them to be GBCs for life. Only if there was a fall down or they left, then they would be replaced by some members of the GBC who would decide who to bring in, and that person had to be competent to be able to do that service. And then they would bring in another person if there was some problem. But otherwise, for life, how can a Diksha Guru be under subordinate subordinate to the administrative body like the GBC or original governing body?